Kabbalah started late 12th century, early 13th century in the West, France, southern France and Spain. With the time it moved eastward, which means Italy, the Byzantine Empire, and after 1492, even eastern to Safed, to the Ottoman Empire. But on the way, it nourished, in fact, the major development in Europe, which is the Christian Kabbalah. However, in mid-16th century, Kabbalah became very creative in Safed, which changed the nature of Kabbalah. And from Safed, it started to move westward. Again, triggering some forms of Christian Kabbalah, and it moved slowly from Italy, Germany, France, up to England. So this second move, return to the West, was not exactly the return of the early Kabbalah, because on the way, Kabbalah accumulated a lot of magical elements. If early Kabbalah, late 12th century, up to mid-13th century, is relatively poor in magical discussions, poor is a generous term, since the second part of the 13th century, Kabbalah accumulated more and more magical elements from two major sources. One is the Arabic sources, or the Hermetic magic, or astro-magical, or talismanic magic, which had an impact. And the second major source was the Ashkenazi literature, which was strongly magical, at least in some of its major schools. And Kabbalah adopted elements from the two different, quite different and unrelated forms of magic in late 13th century, and with the time, more and more. When we speak about Italian Kabbalah in the Renaissance, it has the two magical elements, talismanic and the Ashkenazi. And that's also the case in Safedian Kabbalah, where the Sephardi figure, Cordovero, was much more Sephardi, meaning astro-magical, while the Ashkenazi figure, Luria, was much more Ashkenazi, which means linguistic magic. On the way eastward, in late 16th, early 17th century, Kabbalah became even more magical, especially in the Christian forms of Kabbalah, Cornelius Agrippa's, and some others. Example of D, John D, which means that when we speak about 16th and 17th century, Kabbalah is from many points of view a magical science. Also in Judaism, we have the phenomenon now of what is called practical Kabbalah, which is a certain form of magic. But by and large, Kabbalah became to be much more identified with magical practices than ever before in the 13th, 14th, or 15th century. Now, in the West, in early 18th century, Kabbalah had an impact on a development which is going to change the face of Western esotericism, and that is the emergence of Freemasonry, which is connected to Kabbalah in one way or another from the very beginning, but growingly becoming more Kabbalistic. And as you may know, the starting point is maybe Scotland, but basically England. And then it moves eastward, also to America, but that's an issue that I'm not going to discuss now. Freemasonry in America. The movement eastward of Freemasonry met again Kabbalah, which was in the East in any case, and the cooperation between the slightly Kabbalistic form of Freemasonry of mid-18th century, with elements found some few centuries before in Eastern Europe, produced an even stronger form of Kabbalization of Freemasonry. So I'm going to speak now about what happened in one city in a very short period of time, in Bucharest, when the scheme I described is the most simple form to describe. You're going to see how more complex it can be. When a Kabbalist arrives there, we don't know exactly the year, but maybe 1939, and he started to teach Kabbalah in Bucharest. So let me start now to describe a Kabbalist which is practically unknown in the history of Judaism, the history of Kabbalah, history of Romanian culture, whatever. That I had the fortune to discover 2 of his manuscripts out of several, which apparently are lost, despite the fact they existed 10 years ago. But 2 manuscripts I'm going to show to you in a moment reached me miraculously, and I started to analyze them. So I'm going to describe now who is Mr. Dr. Emanuel Stein. Born, as you see, 1890. We don't know exactly, but the best way to describe is the Habsburgian Empire, either in Transylvania or in Hungary. Maybe in Szeged, the place we were there, and I attempted to see if we can find, I've seen indeed in the synagogue that we visited on Friday evening, several people from the Stein family. I believe it's not his family. So it doesn't matter where he was born, either in Kolozsvár, in Transylvania, or in Szeged. At the age of relatively early, maybe age of 8 or 9, he made a pilgrimage to Poland to a very famous rabbi, the rabbi of Sands. So he was out of a family of Sands. To understand what is Sands, if you know easier, the sect of Satmar, at the same place, roughly speaking, the same extreme fanaticism. We're speaking about someone coming from the depths of Jewish extreme ultra-Orthodoxy. Not ultra-Orthodoxy, but extreme ultra-Orthodoxy. So he made the pilgrimage together with his brother, returned to Kolozsvár, apparently, and at the age of 14, the family left to Palestine. We don't know exactly where, either Mea Sharim, in Jerusalem, or in not far away from here in Meron. He claimed that he studied Kabbalah in Meron. For several years, he remained between 14 and 21. He remained in Palestine, and then he returned to Europe. Returning to Europe, he was already a rabbi. So, apparently, gave a lecture at a conference of Orthodox rabbis in Budapest in 1911. At least the conference took place. If he was there or not, it's difficult. That's what he claims. But let's say he gave a lecture there, and then he made a big impression on no other than the family of Rothschild, who was there then in Vienna. They invited him to Vienna. He remained in Vienna for 2 or 3 years. Then he volunteered to First World War as a soldier, fought in this World War up to 1980, and then he volunteered again to fight together with the communist group of Belakun, which means he took part as a rabbi in the communist revolution. Revolution which was not very lasting, several months, and then he escaped to then Romania. He came maybe from there, but in 1919, Transylvania became Romania. He escaped, and he started to move in different major places in Romania. I am not going to mention all of them, but sometime in 1925, he's arriving to a major place in Romania in 1925 in Iași. Then he started a career of delivering sermons in a well-known synagogue, which means he was pretty Orthodox. But he started also a career of healer, which, as you may imagine, it was only a matter of time until some accident is taking place and there was some trials. He succeeded to escape those trials. He was in prison for other reasons, but those trials he succeeded to avoid. 1927, unexpectedly, he's called by Prime Minister of Romania, we're thinking about an Orthodox rabbi, to represent Romania at the Vatican in a controversy between Catholic and Orthodox Romanians. So I shall return to it later. So he's spending, according to the evidence I have, 1 year not in Rome, in the Vatican. He was apparently very successful, received some form of decoration, a cross full of diamonds. He returns home to Iași with a cross, which means he lost immediately his job. Didn't help that he didn't convert, of his studies, he lost his job. He started to have another idea how to make money. He made different forms of, to teach music and but the better idea was to build a temple, a real temple, meaning a big temple of Jerusalem, Solomon's temple. And he made a tour in Romania and made money. So he attempted sometime in 1939 to come to Bucharest with his temple. You wouldn't believe, 1999, one of the worst years in Romanian fascism. He's able to have an exhibition of the temple in the inside of the University of Bucharest, who is a huge scandalon from the anti-Semites. That was the meaning, an exhibition of a rabbi in the university. So the university is even ready to give something like that, such a room, for his temple with his name. And until 1944, the exhibition is there, which disappeared only because of the bombardment of the Americans. He attempted to sweep them, but didn't help. So in 1942, he's taken to a camp, not for extermination, but a camp of concentration, apparently because he was suspected of communism, which means he was together with all the big figures you maybe heard, Ceausescu and all the others, real communists, for half a year, where he started to write his, maybe first, I don't know if it's the first, but that can be dated, as we're going to see in a moment, a Kabbalistic book. In Romanian, a translation of Rabbi Chaim Vital's book, Sefer Gilgulim, the Book of Transmigration. He's liberated by people I'm going to mention in a moment, returns to Bucharest and starts to give lectures on Kabbalah to a group. And he continues to do so. In 1944, he's writing the second book, which is this time an original book, not a translation. Original before him, and until now we don't have such a book on the idea of the limbs in Kabbalah, not only in Kabbalah, but basically on Kabbalah, again in Romanian. And he continues to give lectures in his house to a variety of aristocratic figures and political figures in Romania until 1946, when he dies, relatively young, at the age of 56. Now, the real quandary is how it's possible that a rabbi, not especially Romanian, because even if he was born in Cluj, it's a Hungarian place, and his Romanian was not the best, how does he become the emissary of the prime minister? How does he teach Kabbalah to ministers? Hard to believe. But I have the list. I would like not to enter now in this issue. The list of ministers coming to his house. Not once and not twice. That's the way he made his living during the war. And that's the way he was saved after the pogroms of one of them, I don't know who of them, saved them. How it's possible that someone is able to infiltrate all the time the aristocracy in Iași, where he was several years, and then in Bucharest, and attract people, but much more which cultivated people, like a minister of war, general, minister of justice, several generals. So you cannot teach them Kabbalah in a normal way, but you must find correspondence to issues they know from their reading. So Mr. Charles Darwin, for example, is invoked there as making sense of something in Kabbalah. Or another person, which shows, in my opinion, that he was in Italy really, is not a claim, Cesare Lombroso, a 19th century Jewish scientist who attempted to find some form of physiognomy and relationship between crime and physiognomy. So he starts to cite, including philosophers, Kant and others. But from the point of view of science, it's much more interesting because for him, Kabbalah is not a matter of ritual, not a matter of theory or metaphysics, but basically a way to understand what happens now. So that is not his major interest to show the correspondence between Kabbalah and science. His major interest is to teach the people, in my opinion, some form of rules to understand what happens now. So I can bring some examples, very shocking. Looking to what happens in newspapers and attempting to interpret those issues according to the Kabbalistic rules, the rule of transmigration, for example. So I would like not to enter on those shocking examples he's bringing, but he is interpreting, in fact, several major events we know objectively from Romanian press and are very, very well known, meaning he didn't invent anything. What he's doing is to say, look, I can explain to you what you cannot understand. And there's no way to understand. So to give you an example, a shocking example. Some years before, in a church not far away from Bucharest, 130 young children were burned. We're speaking about Christians. It was a shock in Romania and it was a shock abroad. And that. Here's a very simple explanation. Those children were earlier the Catholic who exterminated the Huguenots in Paris in the 16th century. So he's not claiming that that's his explanation. He's very careful and say, that's what the Romanian theosophists are saying. But I couldn't find such an explanation anywhere, and I suspect that maybe he invented it, or in any case, that is applied to a variety of other events, which using the idea of transmigration, I cannot enter here how exactly he is formulating it, because that's very precise. That's something will happen to a group together. It's not personal transmigration. It's something for the whole group. So he has moments in which he's capable of making meaning of things which are rather bizarre and no one understands them. To give you the second example, one of the most important Romanian scholars ever, in early 20th century, lost his very young daughter, a very gifted daughter, and he developed a certain obsession, which means he created a cult with castle and music and something very well known. So he's coming with his idea of ibur, certain form of transmigration, spatial form of transmigration, and explains how this figure, Hashdeo, is possessed by the soul of his daughter, And that's why all the rituals we know, no one cannot understand how such a brilliant person succumbed to such a view. He comes with a spatial vision of transmigration as ibur, which means some form of impregnation, and so on. He explains, for example, the behavior of the Prime Minister of Romania, Ioan Antonescu, during the war. He was Prime Minister for 4 years, and he offers an explanation very carefully, I mean, without mentioning the name, but it's very clear because we have the date of his death, and that's him. So he comes with a vision that Kabbalah is not just some form of belief. It's not something related only to the Jews, but some form of scientific vision. Now, this vision is very similar to the approach of the Freemasons, which attempts to look to what happens not just as a certain form of mythology, but some form of a scientific explanation of the development of humanity. I believe that by using this vision of relationship to Freemasonry, we can understand for sure is building the temple, which is a Freemason vision par excellence. That's not only my guess that this temple had some form of Freemason under, how to put it, background, because despite the fact it was destroyed, and I was sure I'm never going to see this temple, I must say I found several pictures of the temple taken maybe 39, 44, but more than one. Despite it was destroyed, I don't have the time to show to you. Wonderful building, incredible. But it is very bizarre that someone who is related to Freemasonry build a temple without having any Freemason idea in mind. That is very, very difficult to assume that it's not. But what happened actually after the destruction of the temple, someone copied it and brought it to Montreal. A good friend of his, which I found some documents. In Montreal, there was an exposition in 1967, huge success, this temple, the copy of the temple. Huge success, including the Prime Minister, the President of Israel came there. But the next move afterwards, it was to the Freemason temple in Montreal. It left there, and now it's found in Cape Canaveral. Which is another chapter, but it's very interesting that the Freemasons immediately understood that it's for us. And in my computer, I have, I have also the picture of the temple of the temple of Freemasons in Montreal, where it was reconstructed later. Now, you may assume that maybe that is a bizarre Kabbalist, a bizarre story, which is real, is true, but it is less bizarre when we enter an analysis of what happened in Bucharest then, independent of him. To give you 2 or 3 examples, some of them are well known, some of them much less, in exactly the same period in the same city. A Jew who was a good friend of no other than Mircea Eliade, named, had many names, something like 100 names, but let's say the best name I can mention is Mihail Avramescu. That is the name he took as a priest. He was named Mordechai, Marcel, Mark, Michael. That's the normal names, but he has many, many other names. He started to be interested, like many others, and that is the point related to my introduction, in a variety of Western type of esotericism, Guénon, for example. He published for the first time in Romania a journal, which is a Guénonian journal, where Eliade published also some of his pieces. He was very much interested in Kabbalah. He apparently knew Hebrew and Aramaic. In any case, the title of the journal was Memra in Aramaic, which shows that he knew something. And he finished his academic career by writing a dissertation on Kabbalah, the traditional gnosis of Judaism. That's a PhD thesis. He wrote it to the University of Bucharest. So that he was precise contemporary. I have the feeling that I found some form of dispute between the two. This Avramescu was very acid, and she was reacting to what happened around. And he's writing out of the blue about a Kabbalist called 9, which is, in my opinion, Stein. There was no other Kabbalist. That's the way he's distorting also other names. It's not the only name. So he's attacking a Kabbalist named 9. 9, which means nothing. At the same time, at the very same time, we have in Bucharest another figure strongly interested in Kabbalah and science. It's much better known figure, and that is the chief rabbi, Alexander Shafran. Chief rabbi in Romania then, up to 1947, exactly the same period. He is a chief rabbi, but if you ask me what is his contribution to Judaism, that's only one field, and this field is Kabbalah. But his Kabbalah is a very special form of Kabbalah, which means a very scientific form of Kabbalah. Kabbalah is basically a certain form of very scientific type of knowledge, which should be commented, and that's what he's doing in a series of books published in a variety of languages, not only French, but translated in many languages, and that he's perfect contemporary, which means that Kabbalah, and also in the version of Avramescu, someone who became one of the most interesting spiritual guides in Romania after he became a priest for at least 20 years. Many people made pilgrimages to him. In his last books, he is using Kabbalistic terminology as if everyone knows Kabbalah. He's speaking about Atik Yomin and Arihanpin, means it's hard to understand. What did he believe? That people in Romania will understand those books, which means that not just he knew a little bit. So let me attempt now to look not just at those three figures, but speaking with other people in Bucharest about what happened then. The explanation is relatively very simple. Romania was, or attempted to be, a little Paris. If you look to what happened in Paris in late 19th century, early 20th century, Kabbalah was en vogue. That also we don't know enough. But that's a fact that several books on Kabbalah were printed in French from mid-19th century, all the time, including the books of Papus and Eliphas Levi. Romanian intellectuals reading French immediately plugged in this development in France. So they started to be interested in Kabbalah, including Jews, without knowing anything about Judaism. When Stein arrives there, he is a real Kabbalist, someone who is coming from the most, either Mea Shearim or from Meron. That is the maximum someone can imagine. He really knows Hebrew, not only claims to know Hebrew, not Avramescu. His Hebrew was very, very good, and he could make an impression of this aristocracy. Now, this impression is very difficult to measure because the names are well known, but no one knows what is the meaning of such an impression. It is outstanding that I had conversations with his children, that they were coming and studying with him openly. It was a secret story. However, more recently, I had the experience of finding the most important book of astrology written in Romanian by one of his students. And there you can see the book of astrology, starting with Emanuel Stein as my master, and ending with Emanuel Stein as my master. In the middle, we have Kabbalah and astrology as a major synthesis that was written in the early 50s, for sure not published because it's the Romanian regime, but the book was published later. You can read it on the internet. And to my astonishment, I see this figure, whom I knew that he was his student, and more than his student maybe, is actually introducing now Kabbalah in his book on astrology. I believe that this student preserved the two manuscripts I received after his death in a very complex manner. And today, if you're going to look to what happened in astrology in Romania, you'll see Emanuel Stein as the generator, if you like, of this new form of Kabbalistic astrology, of astrological Kabbalah, written by a non-Jew in Romanian and en vogue. You can see how many copies you can find on the internet and download them, because I didn't see the book, I downloaded it from the internet. Means that in a certain period, and I'm speaking now only about the best-known figures, meaning major figures. Avramescu was spiritual guide. Chief Rabbi of Romania was Chief Rabbi of Romania. This guy was cultivated by persons from the Prime Minister up to people related to the King of Romania. For example, one of his students was, how to put it, not a general, a lower officer, but was the person who arrested Antonescu after the war. Meaning, people who played a major role in Romanian politics. Some of them were executed afterwards because of it, which shows that really they had a role. His teaching them had an influence on some of their behavior. So I don't speak now about astrology, which is a small story. The fact that his family survived has for sure to do with the fact that while in 41, 42, there were pogroms in Bucharest, they were saved by, I don't know by whom, out of the students. Several important crises related to the need to find place for German officers, and naturally, the Jews were supposed to give their houses, were resolved by Stein, by speaking with those generals, including helping two of his sons to escape labor. Meaning that's not only a matter of discussing Kabbalah or teaching people. In my opinion, his students paid the money for this tomb. The family didn't have the money, couldn't imagine to have the money after 2 years after his death. So there was a certain form of cult, which, to my astonishment, still continues now. I never visited the tomb. I thought, have a photo, it's enough. But the lady who did it told me, look, there are their flowers. Now, I think about a year ago. So I attempted to find who's putting flowers there. It's very difficult, without going there. You wouldn't believe. The flowers are put by a vice minister today, which means the cult of Emanuel Stein is still alive in a minor way in Bucharest. He had 5 children. All of them came to Israel. 4 of them are still alive, 80 to 90. I spoke with all of them. I interviewed a part of them. They never heard that he was a Kabbalist. They never knew who is coming to their house. They were small children. They never knew that he wrote a single book. And I hope now, by publishing some articles, to show them that they believe that he was a professor at the university, which was simply impossible, because then it was just impossible to imagine. There was no one single Jew teaching in the university between 1939 and 1944. But that's what the family believed. He was connected to the university. So he didn't teach Kabbalah at the Bucharest University, but had an impact which is only now starting, I must say. That's a research I started rather recently by having the two volumes. It's not impossible to find more. There were apparently more than 3 or 4 volumes, which disappeared in Bucharest, and I don't know if some additional miracle will help me to find the other article, the other manuscript, which I know the titles. Someone has seen them. But they dissipated there in the communist period. So that is the story of Kabbalah actually adopted in circles that we wouldn't believe. You know, among those people were not only 2 mayors of Bucharest, for example, but also people who were in charge of the Jews in Romania. Simple. They were the people who were in charge of the Jews, who decided what to do with the Jews. And they were attached to him, and that's the way his 2 sons escaped forced labor. So Kabbalah from time to time can be very practical. In addition to it, to come closer to the topic, he wrote several horoscopes to those generals, which paid him very, very generously, because apparently they were very, very positive. It doesn't matter that one of them was executed immediately afterwards, because he was part of the, how to put it, of the government in this period, which is very hard to believe that something like that happened. But Kabbalah is capable to perform miracles that normal people cannot. Thank you.